a chance to participate in it. And it has made our lives, our careers, and the literary world a better place. Let me allow the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll talk about Eric.
Well, I am Virginia DeMarce. I found the book on a Barnes & Noble shelf. I read it. I followed the link to Baines Bar and said, "Hi, this was a good research job in an underappreciated period." As it happens, I'm a historian in that field, and if you'd like to ask me any questions, please feel free. They did.
And they still do.
And they still do.
David?
Okay. My name is David Carrico. I discovered Eric Flint kind of after the fact because I didn't read Mother of Demons or 1632 until the year 2002. So I was behind the curve from that standpoint, but I discovered Baines Bar about that same time and quickly became a lurker on the 1632 threads, and very quickly, hey, I might be able to sell them a story, which I've been writing for 20 years without selling anything. And Eric bought my first professional story in 2004.
I'm Lucille Robbins. I'm Eric's widow, and I'm kind of on a mission today to celebrate the 25th anniversary of 1632, to engage with a community and of thousands of people, whether you're writers, artists, tech people, readers, and us to really have a chance to, sometimes it's like blind men describing an elephant, talking about different aspects of our relationship with Eric, but to kind of begin to put that together a little and celebrate, our awesome communal achievements.
My name's Bill Fawcett. I'm editor and worked with a number of publishers, and the first time I heard about Eric was at I think a Lunacon, and Jim Bain pulled me aside and said, "Bill, you probably ought to know I'm about to buy a book from a communist."
It didn't blow up in your hands.
No. And a couple months later, met him at a WindyCon.
I'm Walter Huff. I'm your cruise director today. I met Eric sometime in the mid-2000s, but first really got to know him when I sat down next to him at an autograph session in North Carolina in 2010. And I said, "Hey, I'm kind of interested in 1632. And he said, "Let's have lunch together." And a couple of hours later, I had a book contract. Not that I'm complaining, not quite the opposite. And Eric and I did 4 books together, 3 in the 1632 series, the most recent of which is this, which is brand new and isn't available to anyone except 16 lucky people here at FenCon. So I'm doing a book signing and a book launch tonight at 8 o'clock. Eric was a great colleague. I consider him a friend, and of course, a wonderful collaborator. Could not ask for a better one, and I miss it terribly. So, I think, in all fairness, the first person I should pitch to is Lucille. I think she should talk first, because she's probably closer to him than she's definitely closer to him than any of the rest of us.
Before it came out, Lucille, what did Eric say about 1632 before it was, when he was writing it or whatever?
Yeah, where did it start?
How did it start? How did that happen?
So Eric spent some, you all know Eric was involved in union activities. He was a member of the Socialist Workers Party. He spent some time in Mannington, West Virginia. And I think one thing about Eric is there was no bottom to that well of creativity. There was always a story. There were a million of them tucked away, and it was like, it's like a yenta waiting for the connection with somebody else, or opening it up. But so he, and the mine workers there, have a tremendous history. carrying ideals of, and he just, I think in the back of his head, he always thought this would make a good adventure, kind of set in the right time. And then in the course of it, and I can't remember exactly what was the other spark about a time for it. And it was such a, you know, it was such a catastrophic period in Europe that everything
Yeah, 30 years
was,
war
you know,
was
was
terrible.
totally up in the air. So, you know, it meant that there could be so much more impact, you know, of that. And mostly he wanted to tell a good story. That was always, I think, Eric, the bottom of it, was to, you know, tell a good story. So, and I know he envisioned it as a standalone. Oh, so that, you know, that's kind of,
Yeah, it was a standalone.
yeah.
And that's the standard he applied to everybody who collaborated with him or read for him, was you have to tell a good story. Good story first, and we'll work on the details later. We'll ask Virginia and she'll tell us what's what.
Yeah, Eric said to me once, the worst thing that can happen to an author of a book or a story is if the reader picks up and looks at it and reads the first chapter or two, picks up the story, reads the first page or two, closes it and says, I do not care what happens to these people. He said, that is the kiss of death for a story. If you cannot grab the interest of the reader, you might as well not write it. So basically, anything you wrote, any idea you pitched to him, it was, will the story grab the readers?
Yeah, that was his, but that's the standard, good story first. So, do you know what, he picked 1632, he picked the 30 Years' War because of the potential of impact of a small group of regular people. And that's one of the things he always emphasized, the whole halves, there's a whole page on the website where he talks about, no, half of Granville was not Navy SEALs, half of them were not nuclear scientists, half of them were not this and that. They were just regular folks. And we developed a genealogical database of all the regular folks. I have to tell a Virginia DeMarce anecdote. Somebody asked her if they could get the database, the GenCom, is that right? GenCom database,
Mm-hmm.
and you said, sure, we can provide it to you. And if any of it ever gets uploaded to like Ancestry.com, I will have to hunt you down and kill you. Because
You have no idea what chaos could be called if anybody ever put that GenCom up on the internet.
But it was
Because these people have names, they have dates, they have places, they have relatives. One could cause incredible chaos. That is why first I and now Karen Offord, who shepherds the grid, do not give it out to other people in GenCom form. He sends it out as Excel, I sent it out as RTF, because that makes it much more difficult for anyone to upload. And we hope, so far we have, in all these years, prevented it from escaping into the wild.
It was just the most
And one of our strong
polite
hopes is that it never does.
But it was truly one of the most polite, murderous threats I ever heard. I always remember that.
You're not from Chicago.
No,
You're not from Chicago.
you issue more dangerous threats in Chicago, so I understand.
Eric and I were from Chicago area.
Oh,
Blue.
so I want to ask Lucille something else. Once it stopped being a standalone novel, particularly after he and David did the second book, how did it get to where we are now? What did he think was going to happen? How did it change, or anybody that might know, Virginia might know, David?
The story Eric always told was it moved to being a series when Jim Bain waved a lot of money at it. I think Jim was surprised at how well the novel sold. and it sold extremely well, and Jim said, you know, Jim being Jim was not averse to making another buck off of it, so he said, make a series out of it. And the way Eric told the story was that he went home and thought about it, and initially he wasn't in favor, but he decided we could do it, and the reason we could do it was because this was not a fantasy universe. This was not something he had created. The history of 1632 and our history are exactly the same up to the date of the Ring of Fire. So all of that background and all of those characters and all of that information about technology and politics already existed. He didn't have to invent it, and he didn't have to answer interminable questions about it.
And we got people to do that for him.
Well, there were resources,
and he also
it wasn't
said,
just him.
very frankly, that one of the things that moved him to go ahead with the sequels as they came along was that David Weber asked to write with him, and he said, "You really don't say no when the 800-pound gorilla is sitting in your room."
Yeah.
Yes, and it did launch 1,000.
Yeah, I still haven't forgiven David for selling all the English colony, but aside from that, so
Eric
go ahead.
Eric was not satisfied with our world in some levels. So we talked a lot of history, a lot of sociology, a lot of dinners and lunches, brunches actually, where we talked it. I mean, you don't join the Communist Party because you're happy with the world. You join the Republican Party if you're happy with the world. Or somebody like that. Or you don't join anyone. And I think this was a chance for him to remake, help put in a world he would have been comfortable in a very uncomfortable world, but one he would have liked to have been a participant in, which is what we do when we write our books, I think. But I think particularly in this case, Eric's personal and philosophical and political views don't dominate it, but you can see where it creates a world that he, with those attitudes, would be comfortable in.
But he didn't want the Americans to always win. He wanted it to be a real challenge.
He spent most of his life in Europe.
Well, admittedly so, but he didn't want the uptimers to win.
No.
He wanted to make sure that it was a challenge. He wanted to put obstacles in front of them, and he wanted them to, you know, the classic example is the end of the Wrecking Crew when they fail horribly and they break apart. I thought that was a classic example of they don't always win, and it's really added spice to the story.
He's constantly saying it is no fun to shoot fish in a barrel.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the other things, and at the early stages, he pushed this a great deal on Baines Bar. He says, we are not going to observe the influence of the uptimers recreating our world as it is today.
Yep.
The challenge of an alternate history is not to see how fast you could make it non-alternate. The challenge of an alternate history is to develop it organically into something different.
Right.
The characters don't always win,
Right.
but the core ideas succeed.
Most of the time.
Not individual circumstances.
You're right, okay.
There is Poland.
Right.
But
Yes.
Well, I think this was also a combination of the man too, because what he was pretty early doing was something that was revolutionary in the publishing business, which was to open this up, to be able to, set up, whether it was the tech people before, just reach out to anybody who had an idea about this and say, go do it, go try it. There was a canon, but that opening up and being willing to see where that went. I mean, he didn't know. He had some long arcs, I think, in there. There's definitely a long arc about preventing the Holocaust, for instance.
Right.
And another thread that didn't quite materialize was to end the slave trade. But to do it with, so it wasn't that there, weren't some big stakes in there over the long run, but he didn't sit there and begin to maneuver that at all. And so that community of people created, I think, the best of a butterfly effect. There's been nothing like that that's still, managed to sustain itself, and even to this day.
Well, sort of the fun was that the way Eric opened it up, it was not the way at all that shared universes had been done before. If you look at something like the Merovingian.
Just for everybody's information, that's a window cleaner. Right?
I thought they were tapping the lines.
Yeah.
They want help in escaping.
Something like the Merovingian Nights series was a shared universe, but basically each of the authors had their own storyline, and the only thing that held them together was that they happened in the same universe.
In Merovingian, yeah.
Whereas
Thieves' World and Flint and some other stuff.
And Thieves' World was incredibly inconsistent. It was all kind of.
Whereas Eric,
he really didn't want that.
Eric had the other contributors' stories become part of his own canon.
Right.
And you might write something in a story and you'd never know what he might do with it eventually. I can assure you that when I invented an orphaned girl with a good singing voice named Minnie Hugelmeyer, who was taken under the wing of a folk singer named Benny Pierce, I did not visualize that 15 or 20 years later, Eric was going to have her become the mistress of an Austrian archduke. Really, this did not cross my mind.
And to the point of consistency, that was an enormously important part of the shared universe. That you had to pass the consistency test. I remember, this is 4 or 5 years ago, David Brin wrote a story, because he wanted to write a story, and he wrote this great story, and it had an uptimer in it, who wasn't one of the uptimers. And he was initially very chagrined that somebody was actually editing his story. He said, well, you can't have this person because they don't exist. He said, what do you mean? Well, we know everybody that exists. Here's the list. And so he had to change. It's not like David Brin has never been edited, but he was surprised to find out just how consistent it was. Now, when I was first doing a novel in this milieu, I became involved with the background people, the people who check the historical things, who check the characters, who check the geography, who check the technology. And it was amazing how you could ask them questions, but you better listen to the answers. You had to get it right. It had to work, it had to fit, and it had to not contradict something that Eric had done, was doing, or had planned to do. That you couldn't mess with the main theme. You couldn't mess him up. And he was very strong about it. He issued what he called ukazes, which are like edicts except in Russian. And he was pretty strong about that, and that was great.
Yeah, and it's dangerous. In Weaver's Cove, my wife's more recent book, there are 4 words in it that Bjorn missed and she didn't know weren't right. We have received, I can't tell you how many communications on 4 out of 154,000 words in that book, like they were on the cover with neon lights.
There's always a guy, you see. No matter what you write, especially if it's historically based, there's always a guy who will come up to you at a con and say, did you know that blah, blah, blah is not blah, blah, blah?
Oh, I get this. I write nonfiction,
It's like,
remember?
the upside of that is you read the book. That's always good. Well, we worked very hard at consistency, and Eric was strong on making sure everything fit what he wanted. But within that, he'd allow lots and lots of things.
Which was amazing as an editor, working around this series and others. Shared worlds aren't peaceful places all the time. Thieves' World's famous for the great fight between Janet Morris, that's what I was trying to think of, Janet Morris and Andy Offutt. 2 of the characters, Immortal Roman and a thief got into a fighting and practically destroyed the series in it. And Eric's ability to gently keep people from killing off other people's people and things like that, which is really common. Heroes in Hell had that problem, Merovingian had that problem. You take someone else's character and put them in a bad spot now.
Wild cards also bad.
Well,
Wild, terrible for
Well,
wild
that
cards.
was largely dealt with by the technique of having people claim characters.
Right.
If you were writing someone, you could put a claim on them, and you kept it for a year, and if you hadn't produced a story, you pretty much had to give it up. Sometimes they'd let you renew it, but nobody else could violate your character while you had it under claim.
And the model was a software development environment, like you check them out of the database. So I've had a couple of uptimers that I've had a chance to claim and work with, and nobody's touched them, which is good.
But it was also atmosphere. It was the way this community gelled over a group of professional writers who were brought in. And there are a lot of professional writers in it that were brought in. But they didn't feel the need to compete with each other. They felt the need to contribute. And that was one of Eric's biggest accomplishments. It really is not unusual, but isn't common.
Not just that we respected Eric, but we didn't contend with each other
Well,
because we knew that Eric didn't want that.
But
Because of the way it felt.
part of that goes back to Eric's experience as a labor organizer. My observation of Eric is that he probably had a better practical understanding of people's psychology than anybody I've ever worked with, including experienced pastors. He understood what made people tick, and he knew how to talk to them, he knew how to communicate to them, and how to draw them forward to align with his goals. He was, I marveled watching him because, just like in the regular community, there are difficult people. In the 1632 community, there are a few difficult people, and Eric controlled them.
None of them were on this panel, of course. What?
No, that's very true, actually. Yeah, and everybody gained from
Oh, yeah.
it. Because the level of enthusiasm about this series and about how it was unfolding and recognizing this was something really new. And he didn't try to know everything, although his interests were, universal, really. There were a few people too in Europe, which was another thing that didn't quite develop, but, that were responding to this too. There was a period where there was the potential for a movie or a TV series, and it was a combination of a British, a Swedish, a German, and a U.S. And I remember the Germans sitting there going, they read this and this is the craziest thing I've ever read, and it's fantastic. So,
Yeah, I'm sorry that never came.
yeah.
You're 1 out of 10 if you're lucky, and 1 out of those 10 make it out.
Yeah.
Although
Oh,
we
you had
could
a
get some
quick
money
question.
from
Let
it.
me
Yeah.
go to you and then we'll.
I'm just wondering, was it Eric or David, I've got my suspicions, who decided to change Admiral Simpson from a total a-hole to somebody who just sucked at politics?
According to Eric, that was David's idea.
That's David.
I sort of figured that.
Or David said he needed somebody to be that person, and Eric decided Simpson fit the role and you can change it.
Right, and all that, but with all that we talk about how Eric sort of managed everything, he always was open to discussion about things that he hadn't absolutely decided upon. So in the Cardinal Virtues, there's an assassination that takes place, and one of the things that happens is that Richelieu is wounded badly, and we have a sign-off scene where he gives his ring to Serviette, to his intendant,
And
to write out.
and the watch.
And the broken watch that saved him in the nick of time, excuse me. But he sends him off, and Serviette assumes that he's died. And later on, there's a memorial at Masson and his C. And we had this long argument, and he said, well, Richelieu is no longer useful as a villain because we finished that, and the Turks are going to be the villain now, so we should get rid of him. And I said, what if we never showed the body? how about if we don't kill him, we save him and we don't bring him back on stage for a while? And he thought about it, and he said, you have to convince me. And then I convinced him, and that's why.
Bad sign or.
Yeah, but that was Eric to a T. He
Just gave away the whole reason to buy the next book.
Oh, no, there's lots of other stuff in there. It has been widely suspected that he's not dead, but the thing is.
It comes back more to Marvel and
Didn't show the body, because I convinced him to not do that, because he respected a colleague and a collaborator to come up with some clever way of bringing it back. And I know he did that in other places with other things. He did it with Chuck. Again, so that I respect that too, that he was smart enough to realize that he didn't have to control everything, and was good enough to let us run.
Yeah, the same thing was true in handling the character of Bernhard of Saxe-Weimar. In 1632,
Yes.
Bernhard is really the version that was presented by Cicely Veronica Wedgwood in her book on the 30 Years' War, which was pretty.
She wasn't fond of him.
Put it this way, she relied heavily on narrative sources rather than getting into original documents. And I said, you know, we shouldn't throw Bernhard away. He was a more interesting character than that. I mean, he was obnoxious. He was just as obnoxious as he could possibly be, but he wasn't irrational.
Right.
And if you really want, something to happen over here in the Lotharingia Must Rise Again area, I can use Bernhard.
Yeah, he was very good about letting people run with things, but you had to justify it. You had to be ready to argue your piece. But that was a one that you felt more like a contributor and less like I don't want to say minion, but more like less like a subordinate. If you had a chance to argue your piece, if you thought something was really cool.
The way you're talking about Eric reminds me of his character Mike Stern. How much of Eric and Mike are related, would you say?
Well, Mike was a union guy, right? He was, yeah.
But is a union guy, an organizer, clearly a leader?
I think Mike was not Eric.
Okay.
By far.
But I think Mike.
Yeah, he wasn't that socialist as far as I could read from.
Oh, he was pretty socialist. But Mike was a different kind of, Mike was simpler than Eric, I think, in fairness.
Mike was probably an amalgam of several people that Eric knew.
That's probably fair.
Because, again, Eric spent, 40 years doing labor? 30 years anyway, doing labor work? He probably worked with a number of very powerful, very authentic people.
He mentioned like 3 of them to me.
Yeah, how about Rebecca? Where did Rebecca come from? Because she's
That
a
was nice.
Rebecca, I'm less certain about Rebecca. She was basically the fantasy hero.
Yeah.
And then she evolved from that. That was the starting point.
Yeah. Is that because that was a lovely character?
Yeah.
And she was also his entertaining tribute to Sir Walter Scott.
Really?
Yes.
Tell me more. No, I don't think I ever made that connection.
Rowena and Rebecca, he always thought that Rebecca should have been the heroine, not Rowena.
Oh, okay, all right, I get it, all right. That never occurred to you. That's very
He
good.
felt strongly that Rebecca was the better of the 2 heroines.
Ivanhoe, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
But he went for the Christian girl.
Yeah, of course.
And of course, she was Jewish
Right.
in Sir Walter Scott. He just thought he was giving her, Sir Walter's heroine, her proper respect.
That's wonderful.
I can see that.
I never put that together. but
No,
that is
didn't.
absolutely beautiful.
Lou,
Makes all kinds of sense.
Eric once told us at great length about his traveling around Europe as a youth on his own or something like that.
Oh, yes.
I think that might explain a lot to people.
Well, so Eric's, his family was quite wealthy when he was young. He lived for a time, the family lived for a time in France. his father came out of World War II, a helicopter pilot up in Alaska, and then wound up turning that into oil exploration around the world, so a lot in Southeast Asia and all, and that formed a company, and for a period they were quite wealthy. So he, this was, you know, in the late 50s, and then they returned to,
Paris.
well, they returned here, and then through some, you know, bad business decisions, he wound up, basically, they lost their fortune, and he was, by 13. So, the trip, I think he refers to a lot, is there was a school trip at 15, bicycle trip, and something happened halfway through it, and the two groups got separated, and then ultimately he wound up on his own, trying to travel back to France on his own with a bicycle. So it's quite an adventure story of how he managed to get back to it.
He made it a good story. Of course
He made
did,
it a
yeah.
good
You're
yes.
talking
Yes,
a couple of 100 miles in 3 countries
yeah,
at the age of 15
yeah.
on his own with just what he had in his pockets. And he got home.
Yep, yeah. You get on
He
the
never
train
told
and
me-
ride it, and then he didn't have the ticket,
And
and
then
then
he'd
the
sneak
day he'd
off.
get yelled at, but then he'd take the next train out. Yeah, it was rather amazing.
And he never, you know, what he never mentioned was how his folks reacted when he got home.
You know, actually, I don't know what they said to the teachers, but, you know, I think he grew up, it was a different period too. And he had also, you know, been in Europe and been, you know, so I think that actually wasn't, you know, he was incredibly self-sufficient, you know, and
Eric could always sell ice cubes to Eskimos.
Oh, yeah.
yes, yeah,
And if you could speak the languages, that would be a big help.
yes, well, he was fluent in French.
Right.
Lucille, there's items you have set in front of you, if you could talk about those a little bit.
Oh, yeah,
Tell us-
so, you know, the ubiquitous, right?
And I will say, this is going to be on YouTube for a while, so some of the people may not have actually met him or seen him at cons.
And I don't know if anybody, obviously, a very well-worn 1632 copy.
One of
There's,
those two.
yeah, and it was always the green pen that he did most of his editing with. And then he did not like watches on his wrist, but he did like the pocket watch. So he always had a pocket watch with him, and then, you know.
Yeah, the Richelieu pocket watch, I think it was his idea.
Yes, yes. So, and the other thing is, I have a book here that I really would love for anybody to either sign in or write some notes. There's some notes from superstars, people that he, you know, taught classes at, who mentioned, you know, what it meant working with Eric and, you know, attending his classes. So, you know, I would love for people to take a minute. The other thing I just want to do is, I think part of the logic of me being here is, you know, just the personal side of Eric, you know, Eric. So I wanted to just make a nod to my son-in-law, Donald Davis. And he's got tons of stories. Some very nice ones about being a teenage boy. You know, meeting Eric and then reading, helping him print out, right, some of his manuscripts and reading them. And of course, Gorg, who lives near us and, you know, was with, you know, communed with Eric often, and then actually helped, you know, with some of the caregiving in the last months of Eric's life.
So why don't we, once we have some other topic, do you
One other
have,
thing.
do you have something you want to talk? Yeah, go ahead.
You can list these much better than I can, because I only know a few. Eric talked about some of the jobs he did. I mean, Eric worked with his hands in various jobs for years, both in Europe and America. Machinist and in a slaughterhouse. which he always seemed to bring up during the buffet.
Of course he did.
Not much bacon left. Now, let me tell you about when I was in the slaughterhouse and he got the bacon.
You couldn't work for him, you could not eat any Hormel products
No.
after Eric got done describing
No, he was like
what
Upton
went into
Sinclair on
it,
steroids.
including almost Eric at one point, because he got stuck with one of the pellets going in, and they had removed the stop button there. It had to be controlled by somebody up above, and he's waving frantically, trying to get them to,
He could have been a breakfast sausage.
yeah. You know,
It
and
was
part of-
almost 163.
Yeah. Yeah, so pallets, or, you know, stray cats, or, you know.
So what else? He was a
So-
machinist? And
Yeah, so part of that, you know, Eric has, you know, had a real sense that union connection of, you know, what social, you know, forces had, you know, some power to represent people. And part of what he did was he was members of various industrial unions or meatpacking. So, you know, he has that whole, I'm sure he's regaled people with that, of, you know, going to learn how to become a machinist. Where you go into a machine shop and you pick up what you can, you get fired at the end of the day. You go to the next machine shop and, you know, maybe you last 2 days. And eventually, you know, he wound up being able to, you know, to actually, you know, do that until he was able. His dad died when Eric was in his late 40s. And I think that he had been writing since he was quite young. And then, you know, he would say he got interested in politics and what was going on, and it kind of got put on the back burner, but it was always there. And I think that when his dad died, he decided this was the time, you know, to find out whether, you know, he could make it as a writer. So that's where that started.
oh, he made it.
Yes.
He did. One of the things
More
remarkable,
than,
of course,
yeah, but
he made it as a writer with his politics at Bain, where there's a lot of people who didn't have his politics. And he got along with them, people like David and David Drake.
He and I talked history and politics all the time and astonished each other by how much we agree on everything. Now, we had slightly different backgrounds. I was middle class, but I was also a state officer in the College Young Republicans and worked for Newt Gingrich for a while. So we didn't exactly share basic ideas.
Not exactly, no.
But when we talked about individual specific things, it seemed like the common sense and the care for humanity overcame almost all the differences. And so he really didn't have as much problems with Jim as any of us expected.
No, I can see how he could have gotten along with Jim, but some of the people that are harder to get along with that he got along with.
Oh, we even got along with Jerry Purnell, so.
Yeah, well, Jerry was,
Well, sometimes.
Jerry was an interesting guy.
I like Jerry.
Yeah, me too. I got to interview him.
No, sometimes Eric, though, would do something. We were at one con where Eric looked down the hall and he said, "Come along with me, I want to do something." And he hauled me down the hall and he introduced me to Tom Kratman. And Tom Kratman looked at me and this expression of horror crossed his face and he headed in the other direction. And I'm pretty sure Eric did that deliberately.
I think probably one of the reasons Eric got along with almost all Bain authors is there was a common core there. It just wasn't the politics. It was that every one of them was politically incorrect in their own way. Every one of them felt themselves to be a bit of a rebel, to be a little different, whether you were a communist organizer or someone who shook things up from the other end, like Jerry Purnell. I remember once a Bain party, Jerry Purnell and Jim over a drink, arguing over which one, trying to prove to the other they were more politically incorrect than the other one. And Eric just sort of trumped them all by coming in from the other side and went, "Want to bet?" Hold my beer.
Yeah.
Well, let's, shall we, do you have something else?
No.
Shall we throw to the audience and say, who wants to talk about Eric Flint? Anybody in the audience?
No.
Bjorn, do you have a good story about Eric? Because you were involved with him for several years, and you're not sitting here, so.
Just the first time I met him was at the 1632 Con in Columbus, Ohio.
Right.
And I've been in the hotel for about 5 minutes. He came around the corner, looks at me and says, "You're Hasper, right? We need to talk." And like 10 minutes later, we got burgers down to the food court and we're deep into this is what I need you to do.
I have a question.
And just wasted no time.
Yeah, true, when he wanted something.
I have a question for all of you.
Uh-huh.
I always bought Eric's dinner. You guys,
He bought
most of the
ours.
times, or we'd split. Because by the time we were going out a lot, we knew each other. But he asked everybody to sit down and have a meal with me so I could work a deal. Did he buy?
Most often.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
I bought him lunch
And-
once.
and
Because he was
moreover-
very generous with his
He
picking up
absolutely
tabs.
was.
He
He
not
took the
only
role
did
of the
so-
publisher.
He not only did so, he taught us why. It was part of his teaching us the business of publishing. That in publishing, he said sternly, the
comes
money
down.
only goes in one direction. This was part of one of his first lessons to everyone.
You know?
Yeah.
Right, it was a very
Publisher
painful.
to agent to author.
And if he was the organizing author of the series, it went,
He was effectively the publisher of the.
he was effectively the publisher.
Right, and he got us all together whenever there was a 1632 event or we were all at a con together. And it was remarkable. It was like, nobody took it for granted either. Everybody thanked him at the end. But I bought him lunch once at a con because he was in a rush. He said, "Oh, I got 15 minutes." I said, "Oh." And then the bill came and I scooped it up and, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, you bought me lunch all these times. I'm going to buy you lunch once." And he said, "All right."
I have a question for
Eric once told me
Please.
that being a socialist organizer, socialist, you didn't say communist,
Right.
was like being a newspaper salesman. Basically, what you were doing, whether it was from the WWP paper or the Washington Post, it was the same thing. You were knocking on people's doors, trying to convince them that your paper, that your book, that was worth their time. And that there wasn't really any difference. There was a difference in what you were trying to sell them, but it was still being a salesman. You still had to go in and persuade people.
Boy, was he a salesman. All right, Bethany?
This is for Lucille and Donald, really. With Eric having passed, his big property everyone knows is obviously 1632 and then a CD Shards. How do you think he would feel about the way all of the different things are moving forward? Because it's not just this. He also had this series he was doing with David Weber that Marissa Wolf is working on, and there's the CD Shards that are being taken by several different people. So, and are there things that you think he would like to have continue to move forward that have just fallen by the wayside?
What did Eric want to do or not?
What did Eric want to do?
So, I think in all respects, he has certain titles, publisher, editor, but he also kind of represented writers too. He would, if you had a contract, he wrote about all of the aspects of the business in a way to promote, the opportunities for authors, the ability. That's how Ring of Fire Press, got started. Part of it was, because he had too many books for, but it also invited mid-list writers, who were going through that. You got a 3-book contract, you got a 4-book contract, and if it didn't sell $1 million, that was it. And it's a really horrible industry that way, and there's lots of ways of being. So he would, if you worked within, whether it was 1632 framework or any other collaboration, he would be there all the way through.
Yep.
And then tell the next layer of people. Anybody you sat with, well, have you written anything? And then, I mean, those are classic stories, but it represented something. that's why I'm saying the man and the works. I was listening to some old Dane podcasts with Eric, which I highly recommend. Some of them are, getting a little funky, but they're really worth listening to because Eric was very, very good and totally transparent and was trying to educate. That was another thing he was trying to do. Was, educate about this. And I think that's in part why people respected him, because you might have different opinions, but you knew what side he was on. Always, you knew what side he was on. So I think he was hoping this would, be able to move forward. He knew once he died, that was, it was going to be the end of, a certain framework, and there was no way around it. And I think that's some of what, is going on now. But on the other side of it, I think it's been clear that people really bought into that. He has this wonderful podcast I was listening to, but it got cut off, about Mother of Demons. Because he was talking about, the history in Africa, because that was his master's. But that if you look at that, he has a profound belief in the heroic history of us. And I think if that infused, if there's any one thing, he said, you look at all my writings after that, they kind of fall in that. And that includes what it has brought out in so many other people. So yes, I think in light of trying to, work through, and then this industry has just been, getting hit right, left, and sideways.
Oh, yeah.
I think that, this is the fight, is to try and do that. And that's, also why the magazine and all, these other ways of, building interest and drawing new authors in and all, he would be that's entirely, I think, what he would.
Let me ask one more question of the panel in particular. We know what got Eric going that he really liked, and he set a high bar and people blossomed in that environment. What got his goat? What got him angry? How could you decipher Eric Flint?
Computers.
No, I'm talking about as a writer.
Not the Luddite part, the rest.
As a writer, because
I can tell you on the bar, if someone new came into a conversation in the bar and they started dissing the people that Eric had taken as his own, mainly the existing writers, he would level them and he would ban them. He would get them banned, not just from his thread, but from the entire bar. He was very protective of his community.
Yeah, that's fairly true. Yeah, I mean, we know that there were things that somebody said last night at the dinner, he was a-technological. So I know that he had trouble with technology.
No, Rick used to say that he'd never met anybody like Eric.
But
Electrons hate me, so say it Eric Flint.
But my impression is that the thing he hated most was people being sloppy about presentation. That if you didn't do the research or you didn't put the work in, that bothered him most of all. It was like, why are you bothering? Why are you bothering me?
Why are you bothering to do it badly?
Badly, right. But other than that,
He got very irritated when we were working ahead. If there was anybody in a discussion on the bar who would not take the word no as meaning no.
oh yeah.
That, basically Eric said, this is mine. I'll work with lots of people, let it go lots of different ways, but if I say that something you suggested is a no-go, it's no. Mm-hmm. At the point, he'll talk about it coming up to his decision, but he was very firm about once he made a decision, that there it stood.
I remember a particular example of that, when somebody was writing stuff that just didn't fit with where he was going, and he said, no, you can't do that, and then they went ahead and did it anyway, and then he was ballistic because he found out that it was done anyway. I never seen him so angry as he was
No,
about that.
but that was really it, you know, he
never
was,
saw him with his
he
computer.
would
Yeah, that's probably.
obviously have very different opinions with him and thrashed them out, and sometimes he accepted them and sometimes he didn't. But basically, it was his vision
Right.
of a world, and when he came to the decision, he was not going to revisit it over and over and over, because he figured the discussion had taken place before he decided.
I'd like to think that we can continue to follow that vision, we can continue to write in this milieu. I would love to do it. I hope we get a chance to do that. All right, we're just about out of time. Or are we out of time? We out of time?
Can I throw one thought out?
We're out of time, so go ahead. David, you get the last word.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, all right.
The conversations I hear among the fans, there are two properties that I hear fans asking about frequently. One of them is the Philosophical Strangler series, and the other one is the Arkansas War series. And those are prominent in not having anybody actively working on them right now. My personal opinion, I think those two series will probably be the hardest ones to resurrect and move forward, because his voice in writing those two series is unique, individually unique, and will be extremely difficult for anybody to come in and replicate. I mean, there's half a dozen writers that could probably pick up the 1632 mainline novels and move them forward. There are half a dozen writers that could pick up the C.D. Shards novels and move them forward. But those two series
Be tough.
are so uniquely Eric, and his voice in writing them, his voices in writing them are so unique. You know, I'd love to see them continued, but I don't know who you're going to find to do it.
A final note of thanks from me and a bunch of other authors. Eric accomplished something at conventions and in fandom that hadn't happened a lot before, and I've appreciated more the bolder I get. Eric introduced the hat at conventions. Eric made it okay to wear hats at conventions again. And as I got bolder, I greatly appreciated Eric breaking the way for the rest of us.
I don't have to worry.
Thank you, Eric.
And don't hesitate, if you'd like to just sign in or leave them